Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. My name is Glenn, and I'm here with Adam and Colin, and your Overwatch League news starts now.
One shot, one kill. Tesla, the cavalry's here. Nerf them.
Well, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. As always, my name is Glenn, and I'm here with Adam
Hey, I'm Adam.
and Colin.
Hey, I'm Colin.
Today's episode, we're going to do a quick recap of our first 2 days of the Overwatch League Preseason. They were 2 incredibly amazing, fun-filled, adventurous, wonderful days of matches that we had between our Overwatch League. So, Adam, why don't you go through the schedule of our first 2 days?
I'm glad to see that the dictionary with all of the adjectives that I bought you this holiday season is coming in handy, Glenn.
It was
English was not my first language.
it was an uphill battle, but buddy, you made it.
You made it through. I think I can. Well, I think that I can talk about some of the preseason matches that we had throughout the first 2 days. On day 1, we had our local boys, the Florida Mayhem, taking on the Shock of San Francisco. Unfortunately, they fell 3-1 to the San Francisco Shock. But again, huge shout out to the San Francisco Shock for pulling out double duty, because they also played immediately after that against the Los Angeles Valiant. The Shock couldn't pull the second game out. They lost 3-2. And I think that, the match, at least in my opinion, the match of the day was that title fight. The final match, the headliner between the Seoul Dynasty and the Shanghai Dragons. The Seoul ultimately coming on top 4-0.
Completely swept them.
Completely swept them. I mean, it was such an entertaining match. So, guys, what did we think about those first days of matches before we go on to day 2?
The Florida Mayhem San Francisco Shock match, like right out the gate, was exciting, I'm sure, for all of us, because, again, as a Florida-based podcast, we have an undying support for our Florida Mayhem, so we were just excited to see them play, like literally just starting off the entire Overwatch League, not just the preseason, but just the whole thing as a whole, starting off that first match. It was really exciting to see them. We saw a lot of really good plays, but we obviously saw San Francisco come by a little stronger. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, please listen to our Mayhem Monday episode, where we actually go a little bit more in depth on this match. Like, we talk strats, we talk names, we talk maps, we talk everything. We go way more in depth with this match than what we're going to do today, which is essentially just recap the overall score, which the San Francisco Shock ended up winning 3-1. So let's move on to the next match, shall we? LA Valiant versus San Francisco Shock. Colin, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the Valiant versus the Shock was really interesting, I think, for everyone, because this wouldn't be the first time we see the Shock play. In fact, this wouldn't be the first time we see the Shock play today, or at least for Wednesday. They did double duty, and this was their second time out of the gate, and where they were really strong up against the Mayhem and gave us a really good show. The same held true against the Valiant, giving us our first game that went into overtime, which is really interesting and just really cool. We got to kind of see what overtime would look like at Yijing Tower. But whereas the Shock started out strong against the Mayhem, in the end the Valiant ended up coming up ahead 3-2. But it's not to say the Shock didn't fight. Like, they really gave it their all. And once we said it before, but we really can't overstate how just awesome the Shock were this first day. Take double duty, and also just to give us 2 great games back to back.
Now, Colin, since the Shock played double duty, just for our listeners at home, did both of these matches, were they using the same 4 maps for each of these matches, or what did the map selection look like?
Why, no, Adam. They did not use the same 4 maps. Let me transition into the maps and map types.
This non sequitur brought to you by Collins Map Types.
Very smooth. All right. Now, as everyone knows, there are 4 core map types within the game of Overwatch. There's Escort, where you have to push a payload from point A to point B. There's Assault, where point A and point B exist in the same plane, and they have to capture and the attacking team has to capture them in succession. Then there are Control Points, where the map exists over 3 smaller play areas with a central control point in the middle, where both teams have to fight over control, and a hybrid map, where the game starts out with a control point, and then once the attacking team captures the control point, they proceed to push a payload from point A to point B. Now, we have those 4 types in 4 different groups over sequential plays, as we're going to see over these next maps. Starting out with our very first group of maps that we saw, Mayhem versus the Shock. For our Escort map, we got Dorado. For our Assault map, we got Anubis, which always scares me. For our Control Point, we got Oasis. And for Hybrid, my personal favorite map in the game, Eichenwald. And Eichenwald, we actually saw the Mayhem do their best on. So I think we mentioned before that the Mayhem were going to be strongest on hybrid maps, and I think we got proven correct.
Yeah, I think we spoke a lot about when we were first talking about the Florida Mayhem and our Mayhem Monday episode, about how we felt like the Mayhem had a lot of really good DPS. So we thought that hybrid maps would really play to their strengths, being able to force teams off of the payload and really allowing them to push the payload at a quicker rate than other teams. So I think that our analysis and our research was proved correct by the Florida Mayhem on day 1. I know you mentioned Anubis giving you nightmares. I also have nightmares of Anubis. But overall, great maps. We saw a lot of fun matches on day 1. Let's talk about Soul Dynasty, though, for a second. The Soul Dynasty, Glenn.
It was honestly like when we sat down and saw this schedule over these 2 days. I definitely think for all of us this was the match that we wanted to see. Well, at least day 1, this is the match that we definitely wanted to see, because this was going to be the bar setter. This is entertainment at its absolute finest. This is what was gonna depend. I mean, this is what we based everything that we were gonna see from now on. Like, this is the highest quality on both ends. The 2 best teams that we could think of coming together, clashing, and literally giving us probably the most entertaining 4 rounds that we probably could have seen.
I'm not going to disagree with you there at all. However, what was really interesting to see, at least on my end, was everyone pegged the Dynasty to kind of be this behemoth of a team, and boy, they were not wrong. I mean, Bunny, like
Jaehong, I will say it over and over and over again. Jaehong is probably the best Ana I've ever seen, and we got to see him play some very deadly Zenyatta as well, which was incredibly entertaining on both ends.
And with that said, though, the Shanghai Dragons, with a special kind of spotlight shown on Daya, really brought the noise.
Literally came out of nowhere for me.
Yeah, Daya was not, I think, on any of our radars before this. I'm sure he's been on a lot of people's, but for us, this was kind of our first time seeing him up against anyone in any capacity. And there were a few moments, man, where I thought that the Dragons might actually take it.
And I think what's one really interesting thing to note is that this was our first Overwatch League match that ended 4-0. It ended in a sweep. However, when you watch the match, it didn't seem as lopsided as the score would lead you to believe. And that's what I think is going to be so interesting about this league, is that even though the score is super lopsided, I think there are a lot of moments that the Dragons could have turned the tide and really turned this entire match around.
No, and when I think of like plays from that match in specifically that Widow man, that those headshots.
Yeah,
on Anubis.
that triple kill.
Absolutely. Yeah, the triple kill would just blew expectations out of the water. Like we did have that clean sweep, but I don't know, it didn't feel like it.
I think
Like,
the other thing that we also saw that we loved was a Reaper play coming out that just absolutely blew our minds. Let me see if I can find it in my notes because we were watching this. We saw a lot of great Widows, but we also saw an amazing Reaper play off of I think it was Daya as well. Daya on attack at some point or another. And I mean, you can play defense, you can play attack, you can play it all. Daya definitely for sure came out of nowhere and surprised all of us for sure.
No, like I said, when you think of specific plays of the game, like more times than not, Daya comes up. That Reaper was amazing. The Widow was amazing. And it just overall was a very strong match.
Absolutely. So out of the 3 matches that we saw between Mayhem, Shock, Valiant, Shock, Dynasty, Dragons, I think this might be impossible, but who would you say is the player to watch? Out of all 3, let's just do this as a day one. Favorite player or MVP player for the day.
See, for me, it's going to be a toss-up. I know we harped about him a lot in our Mayhem Mondays, but Baby Bay is fantastic. And
Absolutely.
It's honestly a toss-up between Baby Bay and I'm going to have to say Daya. Both very entertaining, both not necessarily carrying the team, but they definitely stand out amongst everyone else.
Absolutely.
So, but I don't know. As much as I am a Florida boy, I was getting really upset, but also cheering on Baby Bay because he was just there everywhere you turned.
And I think his merits stand pretty tall because I mean, like we said, double duty. He went from leading the Shock to a victory against the Mayhem, and then turned around and tried to do the same thing against the Valiant. Now the Valiant definitely had a little bit of a better play style than the Mayhem did. Whether it was pressure or communication, they definitely brought something to the table and were able to beat the Shock. But again, Baby Bay showing that resilience and leading that team, that the way that we weren't really expecting. And while I agree with you, Baby Bay is definitely an MVP in my eyes. I think Jae Hong is still my MVP of the day. Watching him play as deadly a support, your support is everything. I think a lot of what we saw in that Mayhem Shock game is the Shock support being, separated or being targeted, and the Mayhem crumbling to the Shock, which is something that the Valiant did. I think they defended a little bit better. But when we literally take the opposite turn, and your support is as deadly as a DPS, and making these great plays and putting out this great support, I think it really turns the tide. I'm going to be really excited to see what the Dynasty as a whole comes to the table and what they bring. So, Adam, what do you think?
I think I would have to agree with you, Glenn, that Jae Hong was probably my MVP of day one. I think we saw a lot of really good flashy plays from Daya and from Baby Bay. But I think when we start to think of support, I kind of look at our support as kind of like the offensive line if we're thinking in football terms. The less you hear about them, the better they're doing their job.
Absolutely.
So we saw Jae Hong not only get wonderful kills as Zenyatta and play a magnificent Ana, but we saw him kind of keep his team healed, stay towards the back. He had good positioning, and I think that's exactly what you're looking for out of his support. Just having that positioning and helping out the team, getting kills whenever you can.
Absolutely. So we've done our day one. Anything you guys want to mention? Any notable plays? Any noticeable people? Anything that you guys want to talk about day one before we move on to day two?
Well, I just wanted to point out that while I did talk about our first group of maps, if you look at the Valiant and Shock game, you might notice that the maps are switched up a little.
Good catch there, buddy.
No, I'm great at catching.
Calling the catcher.
Calling the catcher.
So, the Escort, Assault, Control Point, and Hybrid still stand. Only this time for Escort, we have brand new map, Junkertown. For Assault, we have probably my least favorite map, Horizon Lunar Colony.
I think a lot of people would share that sentiment with you, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really interesting that it made it in here, but we've seen a lot of good plays on it consistently. So, maybe it's just more fun at a competitive level. It is not fun for me. When it comes to control point, we got Ilios. Lots of environmental kill possibilities there. Always love that. And for our hybrid map, we have Nambani. Now, we also saw in our Valiant and Shock match the first game that went into overtime. And when it comes to overtime, no matter which group of 4 maps that they were playing on, it seemed it all ended up at Yizhong Tower. So,
which is a great place to have a
tiebreaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's a lot of middle ground for both teams to kind of show off. When it comes to control points, you're going to be hard pressed to find stuff that's more or a map that's more kind of comprehensive and open than Yizhong Tower. And I don't know, it's a really enjoyable, really tense tiebreaker map to bring down.
Absolutely. So with that said, Adam, why don't we kick off our schedule for day 2 and tell us a little bit about the teams that are playing that day.
Wonderful. So on day 2, we had our Los Angeles Gladiators playing the London Spitfire. The second match, I know a match that has been highly contested here on this podcast. We had the Dallas Fuel against the team from Houston, Colin. I can't remember their name.
It's gonna be the Outlaws, Adam.
That's the he who shall not be mentioned, the Houston Outlaws. Kidding, of course. Loved watching them play. And we had the New York Excelsior against the Boston Uprising. Closing out day 2, which in my opinion wasn't the most interesting of the day 2 matches. But when you look at the long and storied sports history that is present in the rivalry between those two cities of New York and Boston, it makes perfect sense as to why the Overwatch League would want to pit these two teams up against each other early on. So, Colin, what do we think about day 2? Was there anything that really stuck out to you in any of these matches?
And map-wise, why don't you tell us who played where as well? Because we repeated the same maps from day 1, correct? Almost in the same order, correct? Like the Mayhem Shock maps were the Gladiator Spitfire maps, the Fuel Outlaw maps were the Valiant Shock maps, and the Excelsior Uprising were the Dynasty Dragon maps, correct?
I'm noticing a pattern.
Well, you would think that, but the Gladiators versus the Spitfire actually started off on the alternate maps that we saw when it came to the Valiant versus the Shock.
What?
Oh, I know. The league already shaking things up when it comes to expectations. But when it came down to game 2 with the Dallas Fuel and the Houston Outlaws, it was back to basics when we saw them starting off with that Dorado sort of set list. And what was really interesting was when we move on to game 3, which was, of course, the New York Excelsior versus the Boston Uprising. We actually didn't see them shake it up. So what it was we started off with the Junkerton playlist, but then we had 2 of the Dorado playlists back to back. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Keeping us on our toes, that Overwatch League is.
Yeah, the less variety we have, the less we have to anticipate.
We're on to you, Nate Nanzer. We see your games.
By the way, we had a conversation before we started recording about the Excelsior and like what it reminded me of. It might have been the last episode that we did before the Mayhem. The Excelsior, the word Excelsior is in the New York coat of arms. And I could not, for the life of me, remember where they got that. Because obviously it's not a Stan Lee thing, and they're just not like, oh, this is a fun word to say. It's obviously from the New York coat of arms, which I thought was actually really cool.
That's a wonderful catch, Glenn. You really did your homework there.
Thanks, Coach. Really appreciate the pep there.
I, too, know how to use Google.
Son of a bitch. All right, so we went over maps, we went over schedules. I guess we can go over the score as we go through it. So Los Angeles Gladiators against the London Spitfire ended up coming out 3-2. Incredible match. It really was back and forth almost the entire time.
And I initially had the Spitfire winning, whereas I think, did both of you guys, or no, you had the Gladiators winning, Glenn.
I also had the
And-
Spitfire winning. I actually had the London Spitfire as one of my top 3 teams.
Yeah, so we saw a really interesting shakeup here when they went into overtime, and the Gladiators kind of pulled ahead. So I don't think any of us were really, other than you, Glenn, I don't think Adam and I were, I guess, really ready for what the Gladiators are going to bring to the playing field here.
I mean, we saw a lot of really good stuff from Shaz and from, I might not be saying this correctly. I'm pretty sure I am, though. Hureg.
Yeah, and
His widows, I got to tell you, were blowing my mind. I know we talked about Daya being so incredible on Anubis, but Hureg with those widow plays was blowing my mind. And we can talk all day long about, the Gladiators' defense. I mean, especially on Junkertown, like that first map, their defense was incredible. And we can talk about, Remix. We can talk about Profit. We can talk about, a bunch of different stuff. We can talk about the
Surefour.
Diva bombs from Wu Y'all. Like, those Diva bombs in Nubani
they're
literally
frightening.
changed everything, the direction of that game.
Woo, y'all, let's talk about those Diva bombs for a second. No, but having played a lot of Diva, it's really interesting to see the way that these players evaluate what's going on in the match. And again, their situational awareness and their game IQ are beyond levels that I don't even comprehend.
Which we could say about every player that was playing this, because this league is obviously playing on a level above, just the casual gamer. I mean, they're spending 8 hours
obviously.
practicing a day. I mean,
It just is so much fun to watch players do things that I wouldn't think to do with their Diva bomb, whereas I would have probably sent mine somewhere and it would have into a corner somewhere, or I'd have sent mine right at the team and their Reinhardt would have just put up their shield.
Well, see, these players play Overwatch like I picture myself playing Overwatch, which is well, and it's kind of like when you like map out like fantasy plays in your head and like, oh man, okay, I've spawned in as Diva. Here's the perfect run. I'm gonna fly in here. I'm gonna drop my bomb. I'm gonna like get out, respawn, blah blah blah. Whereas you can like talk the talk, and inevitably, at least with me, something will always go wrong on the way to point B from point A. They kind of play out exactly as everyone pictures themselves playing.
yeah, and it was a incredible match. I mean, the Gladiators and the Spitfire really brought a whole lot to the table, and we saw them tie and end up going into that Lijiang Tower tiebreaker, which was fantastic to watch. I mean, we got to see that a few times in day 2 as well. I mean, we got to see that between the Outlaws and the Fuel, which was also a lot of fun. But before we get into Outlaws Fuels, because this is probably going to be the game that we go most in depth with because of the rivalry between me and Colin on this. I want to jump over that and talk about our Excelsior Uprising match.
Excelsior.
Adam, do you want to talk a little bit about that match? Then a little bit more about this wonderful rivalry that the league is setting up for us.
Absolutely. So I'm going to, first of all, start talking that rivalry between New York and Boston. It's a long storied rivalry between these two cities, especially sports-wise. You have, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Knicks and the Celtics, the Giants and the Patriots. So you have these long storied rivalries. And frankly, these are just two cities that they don't like each other very much when it comes to a sports aspect. So it's really great to see the Overwatch League, really capitalizing on these pre-established rivalries and really using them to their fullest advantage. Playing up this New York-Boston rivalry, I think, is only going to be beneficial for the league as we are still, the league is still in its infancy and are trying to, naturally establish these rivalries. I think it's really nice to have one that's already built in.
Which I'm sure we'll see a lot of. I mean, obviously the Dynasty and the Dragons will give us a great overseas rivalry, and the Fuel and the Outlaws already a fantastic rivalry, and I'm sure we'll see LA have a lot of rivalries between the Valiant and the Gladiators. I mean, they're both in the same city. They're both from LA, so it'll be the battle for LA to see who is the best, which is going to be a lot of fun. So let's talk Excelsior Boston. This was a match that I think... how do I put this nicely? This was probably, besides the Mayhem shock match, I think the most simple, basic game that we had seen, and it was really funny to see these two matches sandwich the whole first 2 days, because it really was not crazy impressive in my opinion. I mean, the most notable name that I have to say is Pine. Like, this is almost another Dia situation. Like, Pine really brought it, and I think if we talk about matches where a single player makes a difference, I think this was definitely it. Which is really funny. I mean, I honestly have to admit I kind of underestimated him, but I mean, when we got to see all the players come out, and when I saw him come out with pink hair, I was like, oh, well, I wonder what he's gonna bring, and I severely underestimated Pine, and I regret that immediately.
Never underestimate a man with pink hair.
I'll keep that in mind next time.
I will fully admit that to my basic understanding, I think they tried to schedule out the most hype matches to kind of bookend everything and to close. And obviously they were trying to set that up with New York and Boston. But at least to me, the Fuel and the Outlaw match that came right before the Uprising and the Excelsior did the Uprising and the Excelsior zero favors at all.
I out of the first 2 days, don't get me wrong, I love the Mayhem, support them to death. 100. I'm a huge Shock fan now because of them stepping up for those first 2 days and sincerely giving the league, you know, that support that we all want, and the community that we all support and are a part of. Like, huge props to them. But this Outlaws Fuel game was literally on my most anticipated matches. Like, this is the match that I wanted to see more than almost anything.
It did not disappoint.
Not at all.
I will say, like, you know, Glenn and I had kind of a heated Karate Kid related rivalry when it came to this, but I'm fully okay with how the Fuel won that. It wasn't a steamroll. Both sides had an incredibly brutal, scratching, fighting,
Such a back and forth,
all-out battle. I was really surprised at the beginning that the Fuel had, to me at least, a huge misstep on Dorado. Like, to me, it just seemed like they weren't really swinging at all.
And we could talk all day about communication. We could talk about, you know, being nervous. I mean, you're on a world stage now, you know, with a new team. I mean, there's a lot of expectations. That's probably, we can all agree, the most popular group of individuals on a team. Like
I mean,
we have XQC, we have Taimu, we got Siegel. Like, these are guys that are world famous for playing this game, and I think it brought a lot of pressure as well. And I think it kind of showed.
Well, no, they have, like, if I were to think of a dream team, like, all those people you mentioned were amazing, but I mean, you even left out, like, Effect and Harry Hook, and they're not
yes.
Like,
no, and Effect
in any
was
other,
the MVP for me for day two.
In any other group, they would be, like, listed as the most hype. It was an insane, like, just kind of group up, which I guess surprised me that they had, I guess, that little bit of slip up at the beginning, because, I mean, you're talking about an All-Stars team that kind of fumbled the ball at the beginning.
And I think when we really talk about this team, this Dallas team, we kind of can look at, when we're thinking about traditional sports, you know, teams that have a lot of all-stars, and, you know, sometimes they don't.
What year was that? Was the Heat team where you had LeBron and you had Wade
and Chris Bosh?
Yes.
Those were the early 2010s, and the Big Three.
Yeah.
And they ended up winning a championship, but they didn't win as many as everyone thought, you know, with LeBron James and the announcement to come to Miami. But again, you know, it takes these teams some time to gel with one another, because these are players that, although some of them may have played before, they all have their individual styles, and individual talent can only take you so far. So I think that this Dallas Fuel team, I think, early in this match showed some of that growing pains in terms of getting to know one another. But it was just pure talent at the very end that pulled them through ahead of the Outlaws.
Absolutely. The Dorado map was pretty great. The Anubis one, I think, was a nail biter. We went into overtime with extra points, and we literally got the Outlaws were dominating in on point B, and we literally got to 96%, and it just got completely turned around. Like this was absolutely ridiculous how close this actually was.
No, and I tell you, man, I'm hardcore Outlaws supporter, and I think the guy that caught my attention the most about the Outlaws, like you were there when I kept cheering him on, kept pointing him out, and that's got to be Linkser.
Yeah, Linkser was doing fantastic, and we can go ahead and shout them all out. Linkser, Raucus, Jake, these guys were gelling so well together, and they were doing so well as a trio that I was genuinely fearful that we weren't going to be able to, the Fuel wasn't going to be able to pull it off. I mean, and we can talk the whole match. The Fuel was making a few mistakes, a few very noticeable mistakes, at least in my eyes. And this is the crazy part. At this point, I rewatched the highlight. I kind of skimmed through the match. I can't tell if this was planned, like some of these crazy things were planned, or if it was just luck. You know what I mean? Like it just happened to work out, because there were things that were just ridiculous. I mean, the anticipation that the Outlaws had was incredible, and a lot of their positioning was really great. A lot of their stalling was great. I mean, there was I thought that point B on Anubis was gone, and the Fuel were able to turn around because of their, the way they were trickling in, the way that they were, keeping their health, the way that they targeted the support at the very, very end, and were able to just start picking people off little by little. But at the time, it was in OT. Like, it was being contested, and people were coming in one or two at a time, and it was just incredible to watch. I mean, Jake had a 15-player kill streak on Anubis in OT. Like, I was freaking out the entire time.
No, absolutely. And even at the end, like even in overtime, it came down to a 1-1 on the Yizheng Tower. And while the Fuel took it and Outlaws only had like 38% on the point, that was at least, I think, to everyone in this room, except maybe me, who was especially hopeful, that was way closer than we were anticipating.
I think that just shows the kind of competition and the level of entertainment value that we're going to get out of these games. If the regular season plays out anything like these preseason matches have, we are all in for a treat.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to see. This makes me just want a rematch between Houston and Dallas, because that was probably, aside from Dragons versus Dynasty, that was probably the most entertained I've been.
Oh, yeah. And don't get me wrong, the Spitfire Gladiators game was back and forth, and that was also a great way to start day two. But by far, my favorite match of the first 2 days was the Outlaws versus Fuel. I mean, there was stuff that I absolutely loved. And like you said, those last couple of minutes on the Yizheng Tower effect coming in with that Zarya, like literally just blowing people away, was probably one of the greatest moments. I absolutely was cheering. It was a fun time.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
And effect, without even question for me, was my MVP of day two.
Colin, do you have an MVP pick for day two?
I'm gonna go with Linkser. He really brought it together for me. Like, I don't know, he had a few plays that stood out, but I can't really pinpoint why he was my favorite, if that makes sense. But it just seemed that like anytime I was impressed, or anytime I felt myself really feeling hopeful for the Outlaws, the camera was focused on him.
I would have to agree with Linkser. I think that just watching watching him play, especially what really sealed the deal for me was his Genji play on Lijiang Tower.
Absolutely.
Just watching him really hone in on the supports and really prioritize where his targets were really kept that match extremely close, and it was just a lot of fun to watch.
I love the Genji fight between him and Siegel. Like Siegel is not,
that
like,
was so hype.
Siegel is so great at Genji and Hanzo. To see him, because he had been playing Junkrat the whole match, which was great to see. Love seeing Junkrat competitively.
He's crazy at
in the
Junkrat,
hands of Siegel because he's an artist with it. But literally him chasing down Linkser and just punching him in the head was so great.
And it was Linkser was literally backed up into a corner
with the
Discord orb on, and Siegel just took a knife to him.
It was great to see that. As a Siegel fan, it was really great to see that. It was great to see some great Orisa Roadhog 1-2 punches, getting that small little grab, Roadhog hooking them, and then that straight shot to the head. I mean, that was seeing that over and over. Just it was so great. These matches were fantastic, but this definitely absolutely hyped me for the rest of the season. I'm so ready to see what the rest of the league is able to bring if we're talking on a competitive level that was this game. And even the Seoul Dynasty game. If we are talking on competitive levels like these guys, I am so excited for this season.
Yeah, so I think like we all can kind of agree, we can come to the same page here that no matter what dojo you're from, even if you're from Cobra Kai, Colin, I think that these matches were incredible to watch, and I think that, we had a lot of fun watching them, and I think that, the Overwatch League is here, and jump on the train.
Yeah, this is definitely gonna be an exciting time. So obviously we recapped the day 1 and day 2, and in case we forgot, the day 2 results were 3-2 with the Gladiators beating the Spitfire, 3-2 with the Fuel beating the Outlaws.
It was close.
And the New York Excelsior beating the Boston Uprising 3-1. A lot of great matches, and a lot of great matches still to come. We still have day 3 and day 4, which we will be covering in the next non-Mayhem episode. We're gonna see the Shock up against the Spitfire, the Dynasty up against the Outlaws, the Dragons up against the Uprising in our day 3, and in our day 4 we're gonna see the Valiant up against the Gladiators. See that LA rivalry. The Mayhem up against the Fuel, which is probably my most anticipated match of those 2 days, and the Dynasty up against the Excelsior. So Dynasty coming up and pulling double duty after the Shock, so huge shout out to them as well. So next non-Mayhem episode, we will cover those two days of matches. Colin, Adam, any last final thoughts on these 2 days before we go into our social media plugs?
I'll say that watching the Mayhem play, this kind of being our horse in the race, the team that we're beholden to, I really want to see them kick it up. I don't know, them up against the Shock is very entertaining, very fun to watch.
But they're going to have to bring something special for the Fuel after what we just saw against that Outlaws
exactly.
game.
I want to see them kind of, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and take it on ahead. Also, the Outlaws, just based off of that game alone, very excited to follow them through their career.
I'm glad to see that the dictionary I got, Glenn, also made its way to you with beholden. I love that so much. I was not expecting beholden to come out. Yeah.
AP English right here. I think we all took AP English in this room.
We did. But I was just not expecting beholden to come out in our Overwatch League podcast. I think that, it was a lot of fun to watch, and I've got no individual comments, just how much fun I had watching these matches with you guys, and literally the Outlaws and Fuel game got really out of hand, and my dog started barking, so it was like being in a sports bar during the World Series.
The
'cause
nerdiest
I'll-
sports bar.
Because
The most fun sports bar with only 3 people in it.
All right. Yeah, I'm just excited. So, Adam, why don't we, before we end the show, why don't you talk about our social media real quick?
Wonderful. If you would like to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at OW League Now. The OW stands for Overwatch.
and the now stands for now.
In unison. You can also find us on SoundCloud. We're at Overwatch League Now. So make sure you follow us, you take a listen, leave us a comment, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. If you get a chance, describe the word beholden in the comments.
Pick up your thesaurus.
And if you could do that, that would be awesome. Make sure, if you feel free, you can also shoot us an email. We are at overwatchleaguenow@gmail.com.
Absolutely. And once again, please give us those feedback. We got feedback earlier on about pronunciation and about being a little better with social media, and we are definitely improving as we go. We are relatively new to this, but we are loving every second of it, and any advice for us to get better, we will appreciate hands down.
Also, for those of you with Apple products, we are on iTunes. You can find us. We are Overwatch League Now on iTunes as well. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for listening in to this special Day 1 and Day 2 preseason episode. As always, my name is Glenn.
My name is Adam, and stay on the payload.
I'm Colin.
No final words?
Please stay on the payload.
Or live your life. Beholden.
Cobra Kai.
One shot, one kill. Cheers up, the cavalry Nerf this.
Play of the game. Heroes never die.